Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
Looking back, I should have seen the signs of trouble, but you know the old saying about love being blind. In many cases, it couldn't be truer. My name is Adam. My wife of 15 years ended up being unfaithful. There were signs, and I'm sure others knew before I did. But that whole love is blind thing is real. Since we'll be discussing her in some detail, let me give you a bit of background. Rachel is a Midwest girl, born and raised. She's the middle child of one older brother and 2 younger sisters. Growing up, they weren't exactly poor, but money was tight. Her dad worked hard as a mechanic and they managed okay, but there wasn't much extra for luxuries. This matters to give you a sense of her upbringing. When we met, Rachel was shy and lacking in confidence. She was still a quiet, reserved girl. I wish I hadn't been the one to change that. When we first met, she was 53, a brunette with hazel eyes and a slender frame. Her figure was petite, but her proportions were just right. I've always appreciated a person's overall appearance, not just one feature. She had a pretty face, even though she inherited her family's trait of a slightly asymmetrical jaw. It gave her a unique look, though she had nice teeth. The first thing she wanted to fix, once we could afford it, was her jaw. After the surgery, she went from being just a pretty girl to someone truly beautiful, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. That should have been a red flag, but it wasn't, not at the time. That blind thing again. One thing that always struck me as odd was how she responded to compliments. When I told her something like, "Your new hairstyle really flatters your face," she'd just say, "Thanks, Han," and maybe give me a quick kiss on the cheek. Same with clothes, shoes, anything. But if someone else complimented her, she'd light up. It never really made sense to me, but I figured that when it came from me, it was expected and didn't hold as much value. This wasn't all bad, however, since after she would get these unsolicited compliments, she was usually in a pretty good mood. And as the saying goes, if mama isn't happy, then nobody's happy. But it did get somewhat tiresome after a while. As her husband, I was expected to say nice things and all that, but I truly meant what I told her. It didn't start out that bad. She'd get a compliment from some random guy, and it would just cheer her up and not much else. Then she got to like and expect the attention. Once the bills were caught up, she decided she wanted to have breast augmentation. Only that's not the way it was presented at first. In the beginning, it was sold as something for me. Comments like, "Would you like it if my chest were bigger? If you've never had to go through this, count yourself lucky." I took a stand early on that there was nothing about her body that needed to be changed, enhanced, or whatever else you might call it. I said I believed she was sexy and beautiful just as she was. So the question changed to, would you be okay if I had it done for me? And just what can you say to that? I still felt it was a big expense and some risk for something I really felt she did not need. But she did it, of course. Having the augmentation did seem to be good for her. Once she was fully healed, I will admit that the sex was incredible. There were benefits to her transformation that I hadn't expected. For one, she seemed much more confident than before. I know it sounds strange even now, but when I look back, there was a clear difference in how she carried herself. Small things stood out, like how she used to be self-conscious and reserved, but afterward, she seemed comfortable and at ease even in moments that might have made her shy before. Her newfound confidence wasn't just evident in private moments. It was noticeable in how she interacted with the world around her. She started embracing herself more fully, and it was heartwarming to see her bloom into someone who genuinely loved how she looked. Her self-esteem seemed to take a turn for the better, which was especially remarkable given everything she had gone through during the jaw reconstruction process. The changes didn't go unnoticed by others either. People would occasionally comment on how great she looked, and those compliments, while simple, seemed to lift her spirits even more. While the transformation benefited her the most, I can't deny how wonderful it was to witness her confidence grow out in the world. Her new appearance wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about how she finally felt comfortable in her own skin. It was clear that this new chapter in her life was about much more than appearances. It was about becoming the best version of herself and learning to embrace that fully. The changes, however, made her seem more confident, more attractive, and just more noticeable. The compliments after her jaw surgery were much easier for me to accept than the attention she received after the breast enhancement. The comments were often inappropriate and frequently crossed the line into uncomfortable territory. What bothered me more was that she seemed to enjoy it. Her new dresses and blouses often featured more daring necklines, and the dresses themselves seemed shorter. Since she didn't mind the attention, it only encouraged others to become bolder. People I thought were my friends would openly flirt with her, and if I said anything about it, I was the one who ended up looking bad. One night, we were in a bar, and after a while it dawned on me. Rachel had a drink in her hand every time I saw her, but she didn't have her purse with her, and I hadn't paid for one of them. I asked her how she had been getting them, and she laughed and said she had shown the bartender her chest for each one. We had a long talk about that one the next day, but I knew it didn't sink in. She absolutely loved it. When she was drinking, I had to watch her at all times, or some guy would simply ask to see them and she would oblige. Her behavior was getting embarrassing at times, and when I told her that, she offered to go by herself so I wouldn't be embarrassed. Yeah, like that was a real option. As her flirting and flashing happened more often, so did our fighting. I was tired of guys openly ogling her in front of me, so I asked her to tone it down and show me some respect. I told her I loved her and that I understood how the attention made her feel, but she needed to understand how it made me feel. And for a while she did. She still dressed sexy, still flirted, but in a more subdued manner. And she still enjoyed the attention, but there weren't any flashes that I knew of. We were doing well, and things seemed to have settled down, at least outside the bedroom. Inside our bedroom, she was still my dream come true, and since the fighting had stopped, the sex had been very good. Then she met Katie. Katie started working with Rachel about 8 months after the enhancement and about 4 or 5 months after she had finally toned down the public shows. I had a bad feeling about Katie the first time I met her, but there was no way I was going to win in that fight. Rachel had taken on a mentor-type role with the new girl and felt she needed to help her get settled. Not just at work, but in her new city as well. This inevitably led to them being off on lunch dates, shopping trips, and finally, girls' nights out. Let me tell you, a single friend is the biggest danger a marriage can have on either side. Single, younger, very pretty, and just a bit wild single girlfriends are deadly. And Katie was all of that in triplicate. The first couple of girls' nights out were not bad. Rachel came home at a reasonable hour and, while she had been drinking, didn't seem drunk. I know she flirted and danced those nights because she nearly screwed me to death afterward. But who's going to complain? Then the nights out began to occur more often and last longer, and we were beginning to argue about them. I was sure her new friend was a bad influence but didn't know just how bad. I tried asking just general questions about the nights out, and Rachel immediately became guarded. There had to be more to the story. I had to know what was going on, and nobody was going to tell me. So I did what any guy would do under the circumstances. I followed them. One night, they went to a club that Rachel had always said was too young for us, meaning the crowd was much younger than us. It was, however, just the right age for Katie, and Rachel, being a little older woman by herself, wasn't going to be a problem. Me? Well, I was going to stand out something awful in there. Gritting my teeth, I waited until they had been inside for a little while before going in. The place was fairly well packed, especially near the dance floor, but I managed to get a spot at the bar where I could see most of the club. Now, it might have been only 20 minutes since they had come in, but there they were in a booth by the dance floor with 2 guys. Katie was sitting with some blonde-haired surfer type on one side, and Rachel sat across the table from her with a dark-haired and dark-skinned man, or should I say boy. He looked barely old enough to drink. There were all sorts of things wrong with this picture, and the alarm bells in my head were so loud they drowned out the music. I wanted to go over and confront her but did not want the fight it would cause. If she was just flirting and dancing, we could talk through it later. If it was a date or something more, our relationship wasn't likely to survive it. So I took a wait-and-see approach and hoped for the best. And I saw the worst. It didn't take long to confirm my worst fears. The first dance was a slow number, and Rachel was all over him. They danced for maybe the first minute, but after that, it turned into a dry humping session in the middle of the dance floor. His hands roamed freely over her body, and she didn't seem to mind. His mouth was on hers as much as it was anywhere else. Across the booth, Katie and her partner weren't any better, but they weren't my concern. My only problem was Rachel and what to do about her. I wanted to stop it right then and there, but I didn't want to start a scene if, by some miracle, it was just a harmless flirtation. Instead, I decided to text her. I thought maybe I could play the emotional card and appeal to her before things went too far. When they finally returned to their booth, I sent her a message. I'm sorry for the fight earlier. I love you. Please come home. From my seat at the bar, I could see her look at her phone and read the message. She smiled faintly but then set the phone face down on the table and turned her attention back to her date. My stomach dropped. I knew then and there that she wasn't coming home anytime soon. Still, I tried one last time. I sent another message, please, Rachel. Let's talk. I'm waiting for you. Just call me. This time, she read the text, typed a quick reply, and set the phone back down. A moment later, my phone buzzed with her response, I'll be home later. Just having fun with the girls. Felt like a punch to the gut. Before I could even process her message, I saw her turn back to the guy sitting next to her and kiss him. Deeply. This wasn't a friendly kiss or an accident. It was passionate and intentional. At that moment, my heart shattered into a million pieces. Whatever slim hope I had left for our marriage was gone. As they returned to dancing, I stayed seated at the bar, unable to move. The next song was faster, and Rachel seemed to be even more into it. She moved with an energy I hadn't seen in years, drawing the attention of everyone around her. Her movements were provocative, her body language screamed confidence, and her proximity to this man was too intimate for comfort. It wasn't just me watching. Others were, too. Some people whispered to one another. Others nudged their friends to take notice. Rachel didn't care. She was fully immersed in the moment, her head thrown back in laughter, her body pressed close to his. She was completely oblivious to the destruction she was causing just a few feet away. By the time the dance ended, I'd had enough. I couldn't sit there and watch her anymore. I crossed the room, my heart pounding with anger and despair. As I approached their booth, she was leaning in close to him, her head resting against the booth cushion as they laughed together. She didn't even notice me until I reached out and grabbed her hand. Her eyes flew open in shock, and for a moment, she looked confused, like she couldn't quite understand what was happening. Then she saw me standing there, and her face went pale. Before she could say anything, I slipped her wedding ring off her finger, pocketed it, and then pulled off my own ring. I dropped it on the table in front of her, where it bounced once before landing with a quiet clink. She started to say something, but I was already walking away. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need her to tell me it wasn't what it looked like or that she didn't mean for it to happen. I had seen enough. I walked out of the club and got into my car. My car, an old Ford Fusion, was nothing fancy, but at that moment, it felt like my only refuge. I drove for miles without a destination, my mind racing with emotions I couldn't control. Anger, sadness, betrayal. They all hit me at once, each one worse than the last. My phone rang several times, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to talk to her, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station to fill up and take a moment to collect myself. I realized then how far I had driven. I was miles outside of the city, in a small town I didn't even recognize. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to figure out what to do next. Should I go home? Should I keep driving? Should I call her? None of the options felt right. Finally, I decided to check into a nearby motel. It wasn't much. A cheap, no-frills place on the side of the highway, but it was quiet, and that's all I needed. After checking in, I went to a liquor store and bought a bottle of whiskey. Back in the motel room, I poured myself a drink and tried to make sense of what had happened. The problem was, there was no making sense of it. No matter how many times I replayed the night in my head, the pieces didn't fit. I couldn't understand why she had done this to me, to us. I thought about all the years we had spent together, all the things we had been through, and I couldn't reconcile the woman I had married with the woman I had seen tonight. Eventually, the alcohol dulled my thoughts enough for me to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my head was pounding, and my heart felt just as heavy as it had the night before. I knew then that there was no fixing this. Rachel and I were over. The morning after that disastrous night, I sat in the motel room staring at my phone. Dozens of missed calls and texts from Rachel flashed across the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to read or listen to any of them yet. My head throbbed from the whiskey, and my heart still felt like it was in pieces. I knew I had to confront her at some point, but I also knew that once I did, there was no turning back. After a shower and a stop at a local diner for some greasy food and coffee, I felt slightly more human. I powered on my phone and braced myself. The messages were about what I expected. Most of them were variations of, "Please call me," "We need to talk," and "I'm so sorry." The last one, sent around 4 a.m., said simply, "Please don't give up on us." I thought about ignoring her, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. If I wanted to move forward, whether that meant salvaging our marriage or walking away. I had to hear her out. So I took a deep breath and called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Oh my God, Adam. Are you okay? I've been trying to call you all night." I was so worried. Her voice was frantic, and I could hear the fear in it, but I wasn't in the mood for theatrics. "I'm fine," I said flatly. "We need to talk." "Yes, absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right," she said quickly. "Can we meet somewhere? I'll come to you." "No," I said firmly. "You're going to talk and I'm going to listen. Then I'll decide what happens next." She hesitated for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. "But I just want you to know that it wasn't what it looked like." "Stop," I interrupted. "Don't even start with that. I saw everything, Rachel. You don't get to tell me I didn't see what I saw." There was a long pause on her end, and when she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "I don't know what to say, Adam. I screwed up. I know I did. But it didn't mean anything. I swear it didn't." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at that. "It didn't mean anything? That's what you're going with? You kissed another man, Rachel. You let him put his hands all over you. And you were enjoying it. Don't tell me it didn't mean anything." She started crying then, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I don't know why I did it," she said between sobs. "I was drunk, and I wasn't thinking straight. It just happened." "Don't blame the alcohol," I snapped. "Alcohol doesn't make you cheat. It just makes it easier to do what you already wanted to do." Her sobs grew louder, and I had to take a deep breath to keep myself from losing my temper. "I need to know the truth, Rachel," I said. "Have you slept with him? Or anyone else?" "No," she said quickly. "I swear, Adam, I haven't. Last night was the first time anything like that ever happened. I don't know. I was stupid. I wasn't sure I believed her, but there wasn't much point in pressing the issue. Even if she was telling the truth, the damage was done. I couldn't unsee what I had seen, and I couldn't undo the pain it had caused me. Here's the thing, Rachel," I said after a long pause. "I don't trust you anymore, and without trust, there's no marriage. I loved you. I still love you, but that doesn't change the fact that you betrayed me. I don't know if I can ever get past that. Please, Adam," she begged. "Don't say that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us." "I don't know if there's anything left to save," I said quietly. "But I'll think about it. That's all I can promise right now." She tried to say more, but I ended the call before she could. I needed space and I needed time to think. I didn't know what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing for certain: things could never go back to the way they were. After the call, I sat in the motel room for what felt like hours, staring at the wall. My mind was in overdrive, replaying everything Rachel had said, everything I had seen, and everything that had brought us to this point. Could I forgive her? Could I trust her again? The answers felt impossible to find. By the afternoon, I decided I couldn't stay cooped up in that room any longer. I got in the car and started driving back toward the city. I didn't have a plan, just a vague notion that I needed to confront the reality of my life instead of running from it. When I pulled into the driveway of our home, Rachel's car was already there. The sight of it made my stomach churn. This was the house we had built together, filled with memories of happier times, and now it felt tainted. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to steady my nerves before going inside. When I finally walked through the door, Rachel was waiting in the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up at me with a mixture of hope and fear, and for a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. This wasn't the confident, vibrant woman I had married. This was someone broken, just like me. "Adam," she said softly, taking a tentative step toward me. "Thank you for coming home." "I'm not sure if I'm staying," I said bluntly. "But we need to talk." She nodded, wringing her hands nervously. "I know. Please, sit down." I stayed standing, keeping my distance. "I don't even know where to start, Rachel. What you did. It's like you threw away everything we've built together." "I know," she said quickly. "And I hate myself for it. I've been trying to figure out why I did it, and the only thing I can come up with is that I got caught up in the attention. It made me feel, I don't know, wanted, like I was special again." "You were always special to me," I said sharply. "Wasn't that enough?" Tears welled up in her eyes again. "It should have been, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I let my insecurities take over. First, it was the surgery, then the compliments, then Katie egging me on. I know those aren't excuses. I take full responsibility for what I did. But I want you to understand that it wasn't about you. It was about me and my own messed up head. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, trying to process them. So what now, Rachel? What do you expect me to do? Pretend this never happened? Go back to the way things were? No, she said, her voice trembling. I don't expect that. I just want a chance to prove to you that I can be better, that I can fix this. I know it's going to take time, and I know I have to earn your trust again, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Her words sounded sincere, but the damage was already done. The trust we had spent years building was shattered, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. I need time to think, I said finally. I can't make any decisions right now. I understand, she said, wiping her tears. Take as much time as you need. Just, please don't shut me out completely. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked upstairs to the guest room, where I started packing a bag. I couldn't stay in the house. Not with her, not with the memories of what had happened. When I came back downstairs, Rachel was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the floor. I'm going to stay at a friend's place for a while, I said. I need space. She nodded silently, her face crumpling as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you, Adam, she whispered as I opened the door. I didn't look back. Over the next few days, I stayed with my old college buddy, Derek. He didn't pry or ask questions. He just let me crash on his couch and gave me the space I needed. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I found myself replaying everything in my head. Every argument, every red flag I had ignored, every moment that had led us to this breaking point. Rachel sent a few texts during that time, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to talk to her again. I needed to figure out what I wanted, what I could handle, and whether I even had it in me to try to save our marriage. A week passed before I finally called her. She picked up on the first ring, her voice tentative and hopeful. Adam, we need to meet, I said. Somewhere neutral. I don't want to do this at the house. Okay, she said quickly. Where? We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, a place we used to go when we were first dating. Felt ironic meeting there now, but maybe that was the point. When I walked in, Rachel was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea. I sat down across from her, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I said finally. About us, about what happened, about whether or not we can come back from this. And? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to believe we can. But part of me isn't sure I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. Her face crumpled, and she looked down at her tea. I know I hurt you in a way that can't be undone, she said. But if there's even a small chance that we can rebuild, I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Just tell me what to do. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's not that simple, Rachel. Trust isn't something you can just rebuild overnight. It's going to take time, if it's even possible. I'll wait, she said. As long as it takes. I looked at her, trying to find some hint of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. She was still there, somewhere beneath the pain and the mistakes, but I wasn't sure if that was enough. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, and maybe a small sliver of hope. Whether or not that hope would be enough to save us, only time would tell. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I moved into a short-term rental on the other side of town. I needed a space that was mine. A place where I could think clearly without the weight of the past pressing down on me every time I walked into a room. Derek helped me move the essentials, and once I was settled, I tried to focus on work, though my mind was constantly distracted. Rachel sent me regular updates via text. She didn't push for long conversations or beg me to come home. Instead, she told me about the things she was doing. Starting therapy, stepping away from her friendship with Katie, even volunteering at a local shelter to keep herself busy. It wasn't much, but it showed me she was serious about trying to fix the damage. I appreciated her effort, but I was still unsure if it was enough. Could we ever get back to what we had? Would I ever be able to trust her again? Every time I thought about her with that man, or even the way she had acted in the weeks leading up to that night, I felt a pang of betrayal so sharp it nearly took my breath away. The images replayed in my head constantly, like a cruel movie on repeat. 3 weeks passed before I saw Rachel again. She had asked if we could meet for dinner, and though I wasn't sure it was a good idea, I agreed. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant we used to frequent, one that held happier memories. She looked different when I walked in, calmer, more subdued. She wasn't wearing the bold dresses and makeup she'd adopted after her surgeries. Instead, she wore a simple sweater and jeans. It was like seeing a version of her I hadn't seen in years. "Hi," she said softly as I sat down. "Hi," I replied. For a moment, we just looked at each other, unsure of how to start. Finally, she broke the silence. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "But here I am." She nodded and took a deep breath. "Adam, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies, for the betrayal, for the way I made you feel. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever, but I need you to know how much I regret what I did." "I believe you're sorry," I said, "but being sorry doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't take away the hurt or the damage." "I know," she said quickly, "and I don't expect it to. I just want to try to be better. Not just for you, but for me too. I've realized a lot about myself these past few weeks. About how insecure I've been. How much I relied on other people's attention to feel good about myself. I don't want to be that person anymore." Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't shake the doubts in my mind. "What about Katie?" I asked. "Are you still in contact with her?" She shook her head. "No, I haven't spoken to her since that night. I realized she wasn't a good influence, and honestly, she wasn't a good friend. She encouraged me to make some of the worst decisions of my life, and I let her." "That's good," I said, "but it doesn't change what's already happened." "I know," she said again, "and I know I can't fix this overnight, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Adam. Therapy, counseling, anything. I want to try." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "This isn't just about effort, Rachel. It's about trust. And right now, I don't trust you. I don't know if I ever will." Her face fell, but she nodded. "I understand," she said softly. "But if there's even a small part of you that thinks we can rebuild, I'm asking you to let me try." I looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something, anything, that would help me make a decision. "I don't know, Rachel," I said finally. "I really don't know." The rest of the dinner was quiet. We talked about surface-level things. Work, the house, plans for the coming weeks. But the weight of the situation hung over us like a cloud. By the time we left the restaurant, I still didn't have any answers. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I began attending couples therapy. It was her idea, and though I was skeptical, I agreed to give it a try. The sessions were hard, brutally so. We were forced to confront not just what had happened, but why it had happened. I talked about how her actions had made me feel, how they had shattered my sense of security and left me questioning everything. She talked about her insecurities, her need for validation, and the mistakes she had made in trying to fill a void she didn't fully understand. Some sessions ended with us feeling hopeful, like we were making progress. Others ended with me storming out, unable to deal with the pain and anger that bubbled to the surface. It was a roller coaster, and there were days when I wanted to give up entirely. But slowly, things began to shift. Rachel started to change in ways that felt genuine. She became more open, more honest, and more willing to take responsibility for her actions. She stopped trying to make excuses and started focusing on how to rebuild the trust she had broken. And for the first time, I began to feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us. The therapy sessions, while emotionally grueling, became a turning point. It wasn't just Rachel's willingness to face her mistakes. It was also the way she began taking active steps to improve herself. She dove into individual therapy on top of our couple sessions and even joined a support group for women struggling with self-esteem and validation issues. She no longer relied on superficial compliments or external attention to define her worth. Slowly, she started to rebuild herself in a way that seemed real, not performative. For my part, therapy forced me to confront my own feelings of anger and betrayal. I had to face the reality that while Rachel's actions were her own, I hadn't always been the perfect partner. I had been distant at times, overly critical at others, and maybe too quick to dismiss her insecurities as unimportant. That didn't justify what she did, not even close, but it helped me understand the cracks in our foundation. Cracks that, in hindsight, neither of us had noticed until they became impossible to ignore. We were both fighting for something, though we still weren't sure what. Was it the relationship we had built over the years? The love we once shared? Or was it just the fear of letting go? It wasn't clear yet, but for the first time in weeks, I started to feel like there might be a way forward, even if it wasn't the one I had originally envisioned. One evening, about 2 months after we started therapy, Rachel invited me over to the house for dinner. I was hesitant at first. This was still the place where all our memories lived, good and bad, but I agreed. When I arrived, I found her in the kitchen, cooking one of my favorite meals, roasted chicken with garlic mashed potatoes. It was a simple gesture, but it felt significant. The table was set with candles, and soft music played in the background. "I just wanted to thank you for giving me a chance," she said as we sat down. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." I nodded, unsure of what to say. As we ate, the conversation was light, almost normal. It was the first time in months that being with her didn't feel heavy or strained. For a moment, it felt like we were two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company again. After dinner, we sat on the couch with cups of tea, talking about our therapy sessions and the progress we'd made. Rachel was candid about her feelings in a way I hadn't seen before. "I think I spent so much time chasing perfection, trying to look perfect, be perfect, that I lost sight of what really mattered," she admitted. "I was so focused on how other people saw me that I forgot to focus on how I saw myself." "I noticed," I said quietly, "but I didn't know how to help you, or if I even could." "You tried," she said. "I just wasn't ready to hear it. But I am now, and I want to keep doing the work, Adam. Even if we don't end up together, I want to be better. For me, and for you if you'll let me." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't a guarantee, and it wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was something. As the weeks turned into months, Rachel and I continued to navigate the fragile path of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when the past came rushing back to the surface and threatened to pull us under. But there were also moments of connection, small glimmers of the bond we had once shared. One night, after a particularly difficult therapy session, Rachel said something that stayed with me. "I know I broke us," she said, "and I know it's going to take a long time to fix, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Adam, even if it means waiting for years, I'll wait. You're worth it." Her vulnerability struck a chord with me. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she meant it. It took nearly a year, but slowly we began to rebuild our relationship. Trust didn't come easily. I still had moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I could ever fully forgive her. But Rachel never wavered in her commitment to proving herself. She was patient, consistent, and unwavering in her efforts to make things right. Eventually, I moved back into the house. It wasn't an immediate fix. There were still ghosts of the past that lingered in every room. But it was a step toward healing, toward rebuilding, toward something new. We weren't the same as we had been before. The cracks in our foundation would always be there, but over time we learned to work around them. We learned to communicate better, to be honest about our fears and insecurities, and to lean on each other in a way we hadn't before. In the end, I realized that love isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. It's about choosing to fight for something, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. And though our story wasn't perfect, it was ours. And that was enough. Though things were slowly improving between Rachel and me, the process wasn't linear. Trust, as I'd come to realize, isn't something you rebuild in a single day, month, or even a year. It's 1,000 little steps, taken one at a time. For every step forward, there were days we slid back, usually when a memory of that night at the club resurfaced or when I caught myself second-guessing her motives for something as simple as a text or a phone call. One evening, a trigger hit me out of nowhere. Rachel and I were grocery shopping when a man walked past and gave her a lingering look. It was innocent enough. People notice people, and I knew Rachel was still strikingly beautiful. But the old wound opened up like it had happened yesterday, and I felt my stomach knot. Rachel must have noticed the change in my demeanor because she reached for my hand. Adam, she said softly, her eyes full of understanding. You don't have to hold this in. If something's bothering you, talk to me. I hesitated, then let out a breath. It's not rational, Rachel, but sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like one day I'll find out you've gone back to that version of yourself. She squeezed my hand. I understand why you feel that way, she said, and I can't promise it will go away overnight. But I can promise you this, I'll never let myself become that person again. I hated her, Adam. I hated what I did to you and to myself. And I'll keep showing you, every day, that I've changed. Her words didn't magically fix things, but they eased the knot in my stomach enough for me to finish our grocery trip without falling apart. It was a reminder that healing wasn't just about time. It was about effort, consistency, and vulnerability from both of us. Months turned into a year and then 2. By the time we reached the 2nd anniversary of that night, Rachel and I were in a place I never thought we'd reach again. The scars of what happened were still there, but they no longer defined us. We had learned how to communicate better, how to lean on each other without losing ourselves, and most importantly, how to forgive. Not just each other, but also ourselves. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Rachel turned to me with a hesitant smile. I've been thinking, she said, about us, about everything we've been through, and I just want to say, thank you. For what? I asked, surprised. For not giving up on me, she said. For not giving up on us. I know I put you through hell, and I know I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but you gave it to me anyway. And that's something I'll never take for granted. I reached for her hand, intertwining my fingers with hers. It wasn't just me, Rachel. You fought for this too. You put in the work even when I didn't think it would matter. You've earned this just as much as I have. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. I love you, Adam, more than I've ever loved anyone or anything. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you. I love you too, I said, my voice steady. And for the first time in years, I realized I meant it without hesitation. The journey we'd taken was far from perfect. It was messy, painful, and at times almost unbearable. But it was also a testament to the resilience of love and the power of forgiveness. Rachel and I would never be the same people we were when we first fell in love. But that was okay. What we had now wasn't the same, it was something new, something stronger. Looking back, I wouldn't wish the pain of those years on anyone. But I also wouldn't trade what we'd built in the aftermath. Because in the end, we didn't just survive the storm. We found a way to thrive in its wake that as the years went on. The work we had put into rebuilding our relationship began to pay off in ways I hadn't imagined. It wasn't just that we trusted each other more. It was that we had built a level of honesty and openness that hadn't existed before. Conversations that might have once ended in silence or resentment were now discussions where we actively worked to understand each other. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Rachel brought up something we hadn't talked about in a long time. Adam, she began, her voice cautious. I've been thinking about forgiveness. I looked at her, unsure of where this was going. What about it? She hesitated, then continued. You've forgiven me more than I thought anyone ever could. But I realized I've been struggling to forgive myself. And I think I need to, if I'm going to keep moving forward. I set down my coffee cup and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Rachel, you've done everything you can to make amends. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. If you're waiting for permission to forgive yourself, you don't need it. You've earned it. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Thank you. That means more than you know. We sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of her words sinking in. It struck me how far we'd come, not just as a couple but as individuals. Rachel had grown into someone who didn't just depend on others for validation. She had found a sense of peace and confidence within herself, and I had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to live in the present instead of being trapped by the past. A few years later, on our anniversary, we decided to renew our vows. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about acknowledging how far we had come and recommitting to the life we were building together. We kept the ceremony small, just a handful of close friends and family in the backyard of our home. As I stood across from Rachel, holding her hands, I felt a wave of emotions I hadn't expected. This woman, who had once broken my heart, was now the person I trusted most in the world. The love we had rebuilt wasn't perfect, but it was real and it was ours. Rachel's vows brought tears to my eyes. Adam, you taught me what it means to truly love and forgive, she said, her voice trembling. You stood by me when I didn't deserve it, and you showed me that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and effort. I promise to honor you, to cherish you, and to never take you or our love for granted again. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart. Rachel, our journey hasn't been easy, but it's taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. I promise to keep choosing you, to keep growing with you, and to never stop fighting for the life we've built together. After the ceremony, as we danced under the soft glow of string lights in the backyard, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The scars of our past were still there, but they no longer defined us. They were just a part of our story, a story that was still unfolding. In the years that followed, Rachel and I continued to grow together. There were challenges, of course. Life always finds a way to throw curveballs, but we faced them as a team. We learned to laugh again, to dream again, and to build a future that wasn't bound by the mistakes of the past. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder. Do you ever think about how far we've come? She asked. All the time, I said. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times, it feels like it just happened. She nodded. I'm just so grateful. For you, for us, for everything. I kissed the top of her head and smiled. Me too. And in that moment, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky, I realized that while our journey hadn't been perfect, it had been worth it. Because in the end, love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about finding your way back to each other when you do. Life had settled into a rhythm, one I hadn't imagined we'd ever achieve after everything that had happened. Rachel and I found new ways to connect, both as partners and as individuals. We started new traditions, traveled to places we'd always talked about but never prioritized, and even discovered hobbies we could enjoy together. It wasn't just about rebuilding what we had lost. It was about creating something entirely new. One of the biggest steps forward came when Rachel suggested we share our story in a private support group for couples who had experienced infidelity. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of airing our struggles, even in a safe space, felt too vulnerable. But Rachel was determined. Adam, she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I know it's scary, but I think this could help us help others too. There were so many moments when I thought we wouldn't make it, and hearing from people who had been through it might have made a difference. Her sincerity moved me. I could see how much this meant to her, not just as a way to give back but as a way to continue the healing process. So, with some trepidation, I agreed. The first time we spoke to the group, I wasn't sure what to expect. The room was small, with about a dozen couples seated in a circle. Some looked like they were just starting their journey, their faces etched with pain and uncertainty. Others seemed further along, offering quiet reassurance to the newcomers. When it was our turn to share, Rachel began. She spoke honestly about her mistakes, her insecurities, and the work she had done to confront them. She didn't sugarcoat anything, and as I listened, I was struck by how much she had grown. This was not the same woman I had met all those years ago or even the one who had broken my heart. She had become someone stronger, someone unafraid to face her flaws and take responsibility for them. When she finished, it was my turn. I took a deep breath and began to speak. There was a time when I didn't think we'd make it, I admitted. I was angry, hurt, and convinced that what we had was gone forever. But over time, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't just about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and resentment. That doesn't mean it's easy or that it happens overnight. It's a process, and it takes work on both sides. The room was silent as I spoke, but I could see the understanding in the faces around me. When we finished, one of the couples approached us during the break. The woman, her eyes red from crying, said, "Thank you for sharing your story. It gives me hope that maybe we can get through this too." Rachel reached out and squeezed her hand. "If you're both willing to do the work, there's always hope," she said softly. That night, as we drove home, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. Sharing our story hadn't just helped the others in the room. It had reminded me of how far we'd come and why we had chosen to fight for our marriage in the first place. As time went on, Rachel and I continued to grow, both individually and together. She became an advocate for self-esteem and empowerment, speaking at events and volunteering with organizations that supported women facing similar struggles. I found new ways to challenge myself too, taking on leadership roles at work and reconnecting with old passions like photography. We weren't perfect, no one is, but we were happy. Truly, genuinely happy. And that was enough. Years later, as we sat together on our porch, watching our grandchildren play in the yard, I couldn't help but reflect on our journey. It had been messy, painful, and at times almost impossible to bear. But it had also been filled with growth, resilience, and love. Rachel turned to me, her face lined with the wisdom of age but still as beautiful as the day I met her. "Do you think we did okay?" she asked with a smile. I chuckled, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "I think we did better than okay." And as the laughter of our family echoed around us, I realized that while the path we had taken had been anything but easy, it had led us to a place of peace, joy, and love. And that was more than I could have ever hoped for. As the years passed, Rachel and I continued to write the final chapters of our story together. The pain of the past never truly disappeared, but it became a quiet memory rather than an open wound. Every now and then, the memories would resurface, triggered by a familiar song, a certain place, or a stray thought, but they no longer held the power to hurt us the way they once did. They were simply a part of our story, reminders of what we had survived and how far we had come. In our twilight years, we found joy in the simple things: early mornings with coffee on the porch, road trips to places we'd always talked about visiting, and long walks hand in hand. Our grandchildren became a source of endless laughter and pride, their youthful energy filling our home with life. Watching them grow up, I often thought about the legacy we were leaving behind, not one of perfection, but one of perseverance, forgiveness, and love. On our 40th wedding anniversary, our family threw us a surprise party. The backyard was filled with laughter, music, and the faces of those we loved most. As I stood next to Rachel, surrounded by our children and grandchildren, I couldn't help but marvel at the life we had built. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Rachel and I sat together on the porch, the soft glow of string lights illuminating her face. She looked at me with a smile that still made my heart skip a beat, even after all these years. "Thank you, Adam," she said, her voice soft but steady, "for everything, for believing in me, for giving us another chance, and for being my partner through it all." I took her hand in mine, my thumb brushing over the wedding band she still wore. "Thank you, Rachel, for fighting for us, for growing with me, and for showing me that love can survive even the hardest storms." We sat there in silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the gentle rustle of the trees. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Our journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Every tear, every struggle, every moment of doubt had brought us to this place. A place of love, resilience, and unshakable connection. As the years stretched on, Rachel and I continued to walk through life together, hand in hand. And when the time finally came for one of us to say goodbye, I knew that neither of us would leave with regrets. Because in the end, our story wasn't about the mistakes we had made or the pain we had endured. It was about the love we had chosen to fight for, again and again. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all.